Welcome to Heard, Afros and Audio Interview Series. Today, my guest is Dr. Briana Barner. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
Yes, likewise.
It's been a while. It's been since 2024, actually, since we connected. I'm looking forward to learning more about the work that you've been doing. Let's get started. Dr. Barner, you're a professor teaching a class specifically about Black podcasts. For people hearing that for the first time, what does it mean to study Black podcasts seriously inside a university?
So I get asked this question a lot. Like, people are like, how do you teach Black podcasts? So I am not an audio production expert by any means. And so we more so look at it from like a cultural lens. So we look at sound, we look at voice, we look at audience, we look at like all kinds of different aspects of podcasts through the lens of Blackness and how others are producing what Blackness sounds like. Now that visual podcasts are a thing, what it looks like. And so it's been really interesting teaching it. I've taught it 4 times, and every single iteration of it has been different. The students all have like different levels of familiarity with podcasts. Some of them have never listened to a podcast. Some of them have their own podcast. Some of them are super fans. So it's very interesting having all of them in the same room. And when I imagined the class, I imagined that I would have like a class full of Black students, and that's not actually the case. So that has also made teaching a class interesting, because what tends to happen is that my non-Black students, they get very nervous at first about talking, and they kind of like defer to the Black students. And I have to let them know, like, so we need to address the elephant in the room right now, because this class is not going to be productive if it's only the Black students talking, because Blackness is not a monolithic experience. And so all of the Black students and me in this room, if you ask us all the same question, you're going to get different answers, because we all have different experiences. And I want you all to think about your identity, like especially the white students, because it's like you have not had to think about race in the same way, but you do have race and it shows up in everything that you do. And so I need you to be cognizant of that. That's the only way that this is actually going to work. So that's always interesting when my non-Black students are kind of like, I don't really know what to expect, because a lot of them are uncomfortable talking about race. And so they're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to upset anyone. And I'm like, if that is what you're thinking the entire time during the semester, we're not going to get anywhere. Like, that's not helpful. So yeah, that was an eye-opening experience for me too, though, because I had to adjust my expectations once I realized that this class is probably going to actually not be predominantly Black students.
That shifts narratives in a lot of ways, because a lot of times you recognize the thing that separates us the most and is most divisive is that you don't know anything that you thought you knew of because you watched the media or you took in information from your family or whatever, and you don't actually have a relationship and or an opportunity to actually sit and understand something about Black folk. That changes everything, especially at young ages in college.
It really does. And we listen to not just quote unquote Black podcasts, but one of the things that I asked on like either the first or second day is, what is a Black podcast? And their answers are always fascinating. And they kind of look to me like, so what's the answer? And I'm like, it's not a trick question. Like, there is no right or wrong answer. And that's what we're exploring. That's like one of the main questions of the class. And we explore it each week. And so their answers change throughout the semester, because once they start listening to different kinds of podcasts, they're like, oh, okay, so it's not just that it has to be hosted by a Black person. One of the podcasts I start off with is a podcast that is about the mixtape era. So kind of like the 2010s. And so most of them are familiar with that era. And so the host of the podcast, they're 2 white Jewish dudes. And so I always ask them, like, so is this a Black podcast? And they're like, I don't know, because it's hosted by 2 white guys. So I'm like, okay, well, let's go back to the list that we made about what qualifies something as a Black podcast. And everything about that podcast pretty much like ticks off all of their check marks, besides the fact that the hosts are white. And so I'm like, yeah, like that complicates your idea of what a Black podcast is, because it's not just a podcast hosted by someone who is Black. Because I had an encounter early on in my research career where I loved this particular podcast. It was hosted by a Black woman, and she made every intention to have either Black or people of color guests on the show. And then in the second season, completely flipped and started having a lot more white guests. And I'm like, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. So I reached out to her on Twitter. I didn't expect her to reply, but I was like, I missed the show that I started listening to. This felt like a safe space for me to hear from perspectives of people who look like me. And now it's completely not the case anymore. And she was like, I never said this was a Black podcast. I never said I was like catering this towards Black audiences. And she's not wrong. That's her prerogative. She doesn't have to. Yeah. But at the same time, it made me sit back, and that's when I first asked myself, what do you mean by Black podcast? Because it's not the same for everyone. And this person was adamant that their podcast was not a Black podcast, which was fascinating to me because the podcast was centered around race and gender. So I'm like, okay, I have other ideas about why she did not want it to be labeled as a Black podcast. But even that, though, that is a part of the conversation about like, what does it mean for something to be labeled a Black podcast? Because there are other podcasters who I've heard like on other interviews who are like, yeah, no, I don't want to be a Black podcaster. And they're not wrong. It also just shows the complexity of like, once you put a label on something, it doesn't necessarily put it in a box, but it does kind of give you a frame to look at whatever the topic is. And so whether you like it or not, people are going to look at it through that particular lens. And so it's just been interesting seeing the ways that people categorize themselves and then how their audience also views them.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, it is the creator's prerogative, but we know, like, as even writers or any other artistic expression, the thing that's up in your head has to be translated to your audience or your reader, whoever it is. And we make up our own mind until you tell us different, you know, because we don't know what's going on. Opens up the opportunity of recognizing where people start and then perhaps acknowledging what's going on in the industry and say, you know, wait a minute, this isn't working because this audience that I was trying to work with, now I can't get grants, I can't get this, I can't get that. So I've had to shift even that intention in order to not limit myself for opportunities, which is maybe not. Right? You have to explore that and see how far you can go with that. So I definitely understand. And what's great about that is that those of us who think we know, we get to constantly expand even what we think we know about the medium, about the creators in the space. It definitely allows us to be more expansive and open to it as well. So when you created the Black Podcast course at University of Maryland, what gap did you see in media studies that made you say this needs its own space?
As far as I know, there's only one other course that combines race and podcasts. And it was a course that was taught at VCU several years ago. So outside of that, those are the only two courses that I know of, my course and then that course. So there was an obvious gap because I haven't seen it anywhere else. Like there are podcasting classes, but they don't necessarily focus on race. So there might be some that focus on gender in podcasts. I'm pretty sure there might be some that focuses on sexuality in podcasts. And my class does not solely focus on just race. Like we look at various different kinds of identity. Race is just kind of like the main focus. So that one showed me that there was a gap, but then also the way that the students responded. Like it was completely full the first class that I taught, and I've pretty much have taught it every semester except for one. And it's become kind of like a signature course in the department because the students are just really excited about it because it's not solely a production class, but it's not just like, let's analyze this media and talk about it and then that's it. Because it's one thing to talk about it and say like, oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way. I would add this, or like, I would have asked that question this way. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Here's your chance to do that because we record a podcast during class. And so I reach out to podcasters to come into my class. And so they literally Zoom into class, and different groups of students take turns being the ones that host the episode. And so that is fascinating to see because whatever mistakes they make, they're happening in real time. So it's not like I'm like, okay, pause, let's debrief and you can jump back into it. I'm right there and I'm offering coaching from the side but they are like actually interviewing these people, and we talk about it after the interview is over, but while it's happening they are doing it, and then their classmates are also watching them giving
Mm.
feedback afterwards, but like they're the ones that's front and center. So even if like, you know, they ask the guest a question and they don't answer it in the way that they thought they were going to, I'm like, okay, pivot, we're recording, so you need to come up with a different question. Or if they say something that surprised them and they mention something that it's a little nugget that you can expand to become something else. And so it's been really cool to see how in the moment, like they adapt and they recognize things that, oh, this could be something really cool, or, oh, I didn't know that. I had a student who she was introducing the guest, and she found the bio of someone that had the same name as this person, but it wasn't the person. And so she's reading the bio, and I immediately realized that this is not the right person. And the person on the other end was very kind. And they were like, thank you for that. That's not me. And me and this person actually get confused all the time because they're both in media. And so they
Mm-hmm.
get confused all the time. And so she's used to it. And she was very gracious when she said it. And like the students, of course, looked mortified. But I'm like,
Yeah.
guys, this is a part of what happens though. And so it's like
That's how it has.
in
Yep.
the moment, you figured it out. You went with it. And instead of like freaking out about it, I'm like, just ask her to introduce herself. And then that solves it right there. And so it was a really great teaching moment for the other students too, because it showed them like, if I make a mistake, it's okay. Like I can pivot and I can
Mm-hmm.
figure it out. So like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you just made that mistake. I never approached any of it like that. And so it gave them the confidence to know that like when mistakes happen, we figure it out.
Your research focuses on Black podcasts as cultural production, and you are taking a different approach from the average listener, obviously. So, when you listen to Black podcasts or think about them, what do you hear that maybe the broader industry misses?
Ooh, this is a good question. One of the things that I've had to grapple with as a researcher is that when I am talking about Black podcasts, I am not talking about every single Black podcast or saying that there's a specific sound or a specific like genre of Black podcasts. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do think that there are some interesting things I'm studying. So one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the podcasts that I study, that they are very intentional about centering Black audiences. So they are not saying that if you aren't Black, you can't listen, but they also are saying that I'm not going to explain certain things. I'm going to assume that you have the cultural knowledge. If you are Black and listening, that you can understand and follow along without me having to like break down every little minute thing. And if you are listening and you don't know the information, then you can figure it out on your own. I'm not going to explain anything to you because if you don't get it, then this isn't for you. So I see this like for us by us thing with early Black Twitter discourse. And I feel like the same thing was happening, I think, in like the earlier days of the Black podcast renaissance, if you want to call it. I feel like now that it's become more corporatized, there's less of that. So definitely centering Black audiences. The music that they use is also like very much hip hop, R&B, or it's just like the music just sounds different.
Mm.
There are a lot of podcasts I listen to where it sounds just like stock music or like music that doesn't really like let you know what the episode is going to be about. Whereas other podcasts I listen to, it'll have like heavy bass. It'll be just like different things to let you know, like, okay, this is going to be a show that is catered towards some aspect of Black popular culture.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them also are interested in presenting topics that are not seen in mainstream media, but that Black people are like, oh yeah, we've been doing that. So one of the podcasts that my students particularly love is Black People Love Paramore. And the podcast is not solely about Paramore, but it is about Black people who like things that are not like typically seen as Black interests.
Mm-hmm.
Paramore is one of them, but I mean, it's a variety of different things. And my students, especially my Black students, have come to me, but even my non-Black students have come to me afterwards and are like, wow, I feel seen after hearing this podcast in a way that I haven't in forever, because I thought I was the only one, or I thought that I was like different because I, you know, like things that are not considered normal. I think that that is a surprise, I think, to people who don't understand Black culture, but for the guests, especially who come on, but also even like the way that my students responded to it, it was like, oh yeah, of course Black people like Paramore, like it's music, or of course Black people like punk rock, or of course Black people like whatever kind of thing, anime, whatever. Like, of course, Black people like those things. There are always going to be pockets of different people in different topics. You just don't always see them because in mainstream media, it's like they're catering to a very specific audience. And so I think that podcasts are a fantastic way to remedy that, because you don't have to cater to all people. You can be very niche with your audience, and like that's expected. And I think that that's why people gravitate towards them, because it's like, these are my people, and I can type in whatever topic I want and find most likely a podcast that caters to that audience. And you can't always do that with mainstream media.
It's so important to be able to show the range. And that is the majority of the problem, that there's no range when it comes to, like you said, mainstream. You have to almost seek it out. You know, you think about podcast discoverability. You think about folks who are the loudest about stop buying podcast mics. And it's like, I'm very clear that you haven't gone any further than what you're seeing on social media or mainstream, because if you went any deeper, you know that there's so much more out there, so much to explore. And that's one of the points and purposes of this series, is that we get to have these conversations with different podcasters, different creators who are, they're talking about women's reproductive health. They're talking about aging. They're talking about music. The range is crazy. And I'm a big proponent. If I did it, then guess who does it? Black people. Black man does it. Like if I did it, whatever it is, then guess who does it? And it's, those things are very well kept away from, oh, okay, you skateboard, you like Bad Brains. There are all these things that people don't even recognize because it's not the thing that's going up to the top, as far as just uncovering that we are in everything. We are the originators of most things. So of course we have the range to talk about, discuss, and experience a multitude of things that are happening in the world.
That makes complete sense. And I'm not teaching this year because I'm working on my book about Black podcasts. And when cultural moments happen, I always like, I wish that I was in the classroom. Because of the kinds of classes I teach, I can bring in those different moments. So like the Bad Bunny Super Bowl halftime show, I know that my students are going to be talking about that probably for the rest of the semester, because last year when Kendrick performed at the Super Bowl, they brought it up every class period, and they found like different ways to frame it. They found like new things that they were seeing that they didn't see last week. And so it's like, those are the moments that I absolutely love, because it could just be like, oh, this is a Super Bowl halftime show. It's not that big of a deal. It's just sports, or it's just that. And it's like, sure. But also, once you like take those little moments and you like really break them down, there's so many different ways that you can analyze and talk about these things. Because I mean, the Bad Bunny show is one show, but I'm sure that if you type it into Apple Podcasts or whatever, there's so many different angles that people are gonna bring up. Like, I do not speak Spanish, but I can still feel the music. I can still feel the energy, and I can also understand how important this is and how important this moment is for Bad Bunny's fans, but also for people who are seeing him on stage and are like, I'm seeing myself represented and I'm seen. That is not a small thing. And I think that sometimes we take that for granted, where it's like, oh, representation is not that big of a deal, or like we're past it. No, we're not. And you can tell we're not by the responses that people have when you have moments like that. Like the fact that Bad Bunny's show is considered historic and we're in 2026. That should not be a historic moment to have Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl singing his songs in Spanish. Like, that should not be a historic moment, yet it was. And so that shows you representation. We have a very long way to go, especially with the very limited representations that we see in mainstream media. But digital platforms like podcasts allow for us to widen like immensely the different representations that we see. So like I said, I can only imagine. I haven't heard any episodes myself of like just analyzing the show, but I'm sure that there are a ton. Like anytime a cultural moment happens, I rush to my podcast because I already know like the perspective that I'm going to get from the podcast. I'm not going to see it on CNN or wherever else. Like, it's going to be completely different. And I can take one topic and I can get all these different perspectives just from listening to 2 or 3 different podcasts.
Yeah. Because the great thing about this work and being an independent creator is that, one, it begins and ends with the creator. So it's going to be from their filter, their perspective, their experiences, Everything they know how to be, who to be, is what's going to come across on the mic. Nothing more, nothing less. Most of us are giving our 100% here of who we are. And so when you think about critical thought and analysis of that, and knowing that each individual is going to bring their own perspective, that is what's so dope about this work. And if you think about how the country, media, and all of that has extrapolated so much from our culture, even thinking about that historical moment and In Living Color being the reason why Super Bowl halftimes even started.
Right.
And all of these moments that have become, and we're just geeking out really quickly on, or I'm geeking out by myself, sorry, about the halftimes. Those moments that were the most controversial was Prince with his guitar and Janet Jackson with the malfunctioning wardrobe. And it's like, wow, what if we had those conversations in podcasting, because only one narrative was being told.
Right.
Only one narrative, the typical one.
Yep. And what you're saying is absolutely brilliant, because it's like with the narrative, like that pretty much ruined Janet's career for a very long time. And it's still being brought up. But then something else interesting that I've been seeing happen is like with podcasts or with just like the cultural conversations that we're having, and people are like looking back at moments. I've been seeing that happen a lot more. And so now it's, let's take a look again at the Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction. Let's look at how she was treated, and let's look at how Justin completely got like removed from any responsibility, and his career flourished after that while hers did not. And how, 20 plus years later, he issued like a random apology to her. But it's like, you could have also done that when it happened, and no one questioned it like openly. And so I think that also is one of the interesting things that I'm seeing happen, is like the looking back, analyzing, and looking at it from a different lens, obviously, because it happened 20 plus years ago, but we didn't have the same spaces to have those kinds of conversations, like you're saying. Like, I remember when that happened, and I was younger, and I was like, what is happening? And even as a child, I was like, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's not like there was any other space where I could kind of think through those thoughts, because all I saw on the news was how it was the most horrible thing. Like, him, like, what about the children, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's one narrative, but we also are taking away her own agency as a woman, also thinking about like what that experience was like for her. And that whole situation was wild. But again, we did not have the spaces at that time to offer a ton of different perspectives, because mainstream media is like, we're going with one narrative, and like, who's going to stop us? Who's going to challenge us?
Absolutely. And social media has also provided that same opportunity where everything is being talked about. There's an op-ed for every single situation that occurs at this point. And it's a good thing. You describe your classroom as a lab. What happens when students don't just analyze podcasts, but actually make them, which is what you all do as well?
Each semester has been different, which I love. And it makes it exciting because no class is the same. And like the things that they want to talk about are different. Some of them are like, I don't know what to talk about. And I'm like, okay, well, you can figure it out. I think that one of the hardest things for students who take the class is that because they are so used to classes where they have very limited creativity, and they're so stuck on, what do I need to do to get an A? That's the most important thing to me. That's not the way that I'm teaching this class. Honestly, I wish I didn't have to give you all grades, because if I did, you would be able to just focus on what the product is. And so I think, especially for my high achieving students, they think that I'm like joking or not being serious. And I'm like, no, I want you to be as creative as possible. And I know that the way that you're used to learning is hindering you from being able to be creative. And so usually like around halfway through the semester, they finally are like, okay, I'm ready to be creative. I can step away from needing to get an A and really focus on what I'm doing. When that happens, that's when I can really start working with them, because then it's like, okay, now you can have the space to make mistakes. Now you have the space to like explore different things. And you might start off thinking, I want to produce the episode about one topic, and then by the end of the semester it's, no, actually I want to do it on something completely different. And so that has been really, really great to see the growth of the students. The ones that already came in creative, like they don't have a challenge with it, but the ones that aren't, which a lot of them are that way, because for them it's just like, I need to get all A's. That's like my main priority. And so those are the most challenging students at the beginning, and then by the end, those are the ones that I just love seeing their final projects, because you can just really see that like this is not just an assignment for them, this is something that is important to them, and like they really really put a lot of work into it. Some of them have actually like went on to start their own podcast, because they really enjoyed the process of making it in the class, which is really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them have also thought about other ways to be involved in the podcast industry, that it's not just as a hosts,
Mm-hmm.
but as like doing marketing or being the ones to kind of like connect guests to hosts, or just like all of the different areas and ways that you can be involved in the industry. Because the very first time that I taught the class, it was just like, we're going to bring in podcast hosts. But then I started thinking about it like, no, I should expand it and then bring in other people. And so that has been really rewarding, is hearing their different perspectives and the students getting more and more comfortable asking them questions. Because sometimes at the beginning, they're like, oh, I don't have a question, I don't want to know. And I'm like, do y'all not understand that people who are in front of you right now, like, when is the next time you're going to be able to ask questions
Mm-hmm.
freely in front of this person? They are giving us their undivided time. You all need to be treating this as if this is like a networking experience for you all, and like ask them whatever questions that you have about podcasting, because clearly you took this class for a reason. You have some interest in podcasting and you're a communication major. So in some aspect, you want to work within media doing whatever. These are people who are established in the industry. Ask them questions, ask them about how they started, ask them about their failures, ask them about what advice they have, or, you know, whatever. And so that has also been interesting, seeing them get their confidence up to ask those kinds of questions. And a lot of their questions also are along the lines of like, will I be able to get a job when I graduate? Because the media layoffs have been absolutely horrible. And this is actually similar to how it was when I graduated in 2012 with my journalism degree. It was kind of like the same doomsday thing when
Mm.
I graduated too. We also talk a lot about for them like what the changing industry means for them graduating with degrees in a field that they're not sure is the most stable.
For sure. I mean, as you've been talking, I'm just thinking about how much of a gift you are. We know how restrictive and limiting academia can be.
Yeah.
And so this expansiveness, this building of confidence, whether you're an adult or a student, like this really does support that. Communication, it opens up possibilities for what can be done. And yes, the industry is unstable. The industry put capitalism first very quickly when it came to this art form, but there's so much space and room for independent and entrepreneurial spirited people in this industry.
I think that for them, when they talk about their anxieties about whether or not they're going to have a job when they graduate, it's also just about like, what does that mean for my identity? Like, what role do I want to have in the industry? But also, like, as a young person, what do I have to say? And will people actually listen to me? Because I think that they also are in a very interesting space as college students, where it's like, yes, we're encouraging them to speak, but like, is anyone actually going to listen to what I have to say?
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the benefits of my class is that this is an open forum for them to voice those concerns. And it gives them a space to say, like, okay, I do have this platform. What do I want to talk about? And so for a lot of them, especially for the non-Black students, they're like, well, how can I be non-Black and make a Black podcast? And I'm like, okay, so let's take away the fact that you're not Black. That doesn't matter. We've talked about a variety of different things. You have identities that you may or may not have explored. And so this is the space for you to do that. But in order for me to get them to the point to where they can have those kinds of conversations, they have to be comfortable having those kinds of conversations in the class first,
Mm-hmm.
and addressing those uncomfortable feelings. Like, I will never forget during the very first semester that I taught the class, we were talking about code switching. And again, the Black students were speaking and no one else was. And so I noticed it and I was like, I'm just going to let it play out. I'm going to see what happens. Because a lot of times I will step back and that's when the magic really happens. And so one of my Black students raised their hand and they were like, so I want to hear from the other students, because we've been talking this whole time and like, we're opening up and being vulnerable and sharing, but y'all are not doing the same thing. And they were like, I'm sorry if I'm stepping on toes, but like, I don't feel that that's fair. And then they looked at me like, and I'm like, I agree with you. I
Yeah.
was waiting on somebody to point it out. And it would have hit different if I said it, but the student saying it is different. And so I could tell the other students were like, And then one brave student was like, okay, I'll go. And then it opened up the conversation for them to feel comfortable to examine, like, okay, I am not Black, but I have code switched. Some of them started talking about, like, I'm first gen, I work and go to school. And so, like, when I'm at my job, I have to code switch there. Or I have students who are queer and who are not out to their family, and they have to code switch when they go to their family. And so I'm like, now you all are thinking about the different layers of identity, that it's not just like, oh, well, I'm not Black, so I can't contribute. No, let's take it further. Like, if you have not had to think about your identity, you're doing it now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I want you to sit and think about, like, your place in society, because even my white male students, especially, they are like, I don't know where I fit in. And I'm like, I understand. So talk about that. Talk about that discomfort. Talk about what it means for you as a white male student. I don't want you to center yourself as, woe is me, I can't do anything because I'm being attacked as a white male. That's not going to get you anywhere. But I do want you to sit with, what does it mean for me as a white male student in this moment? What does it mean for me to be a white male student in this kind of class? Like, you took the class for a reason. So,
Yeah.
like, what
Yeah.
does that mean for you? Have hard conversations with your peers, with your family members. And so I started seeing those kinds of things happen too, which is exciting, because they're like, I would have never thought to have those kinds of conversations with my family or with my friends or whatever. Like, we just don't talk about those kinds of things. And it's like, at the end of the day, that's what podcasts are. It's people talking and people having conversations. And you cannot have an authentic conversation if you're not willing to be authentic.
Right, right, right. And be open to allowing different perspectives and experiences and knowledge in, because everyone has a relationship to Black culture.
Right.
And whatever they're doing, whether they're using something that was invented by Black folks and they have no idea, and or just
Yeah.
their peripheral relationship to the world. So being able to analyze that, really, that is one of the biggest issues with our world, is that reflection, pausing for just a second. We're so
Yeah.
in motion that we don't take the time to actually reflect and think about what it is we're doing, what it is we're engaging and interacting with on a day-to-day basis, that we don't even recognize that we're all moving inside of each other's spaces and cultures all day long.
Yep, literally, that's exactly what we're doing. And I think that students just don't know how to talk about that, because the adults around them also don't
Right.
talk about it. And it's like, especially for my white students, they are like, is it okay for me to talk about race? And I'm like, why wouldn't it be? Like,
Mm-hmm.
did you think that you were going to come to this class and not talk about race? It's
Yeah.
called Black Podcast, and it's going to be on your transcript. So, like, you took this class for a reason. I didn't force you to take it. You took it. So I always ask them too, like, why did you take the class?
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of them, it's like, we don't have any other classes like this. And it sounded interesting. So I took it, and they don't know what to expect. And by the end of the class, it's very rewarding to see, even if it's like, now I feel more comfortable, like, thinking through what it means to be white. Now I can sit down and think about, oh, I've seen 5 movies this year and none of them have a Black person in them. Let's think about why, or why I didn't notice that before this class. And what is it like for me to watch something and to see myself? But my friend over here is watching the same movie as me, and they have to watch it knowing that they don't see themselves represented. They're having a completely different viewing experience than I am.
Yeah.
And so, again, like, those kinds of conversations are uncomfortable, but I think that the more uncomfortable it is, the beautiful the conversation goes, if both people are willing to be open and to be curious, not judgmental, but to be curious about the things that they may not understand.
Yeah. It shifts everything. I don't think folks really understand how much it really does shift how people engage and interact with each other, just by simply
Yeah.
knowing something more than you thought you knew. So that's great. And you've contributed work around podcast preservation. Why does preserving Black podcasts matter? What gets lost if we don't?
Ooh, good question. So that is definitely the crux of my book. So I am starting my book illuminating the work of Combat Jack. I feel like he does not get his flowers enough at all. And so when I first started doing my podcast research, the Loudspeakers Network was like the holy grail for me. I listened to so many podcasts from the Loudspeakers Network. And then he actually passed away like the following year after I started listening. So I was not expecting it. I was like, whoa, it happened so fast. So I was like, what's going to happen to all of the podcasts? What's going to happen to the Comeback Jack show? What's going to happen to all of the different podcasts? And the kind of researcher that he was is like unmatched. He would do hours and hours and hours of research for every single guest that he did, and he had just this beautiful connection with his guests. But even beyond that, it was very important to him to preserve hip hop. Like that was like the crux of his show. He's like, I want to make sure that people are aware of hip hop giants that are not being covered in mainstream media. So that's kind of where I started thinking about it, because his approach to preserving the stories of hip hop greats, it was very important to him, because he's like, if I don't do it, if we don't do it as fans or as people who are a part of this culture, we can't rely on mainstream media to do it, because they're not going to do it at all. And so I feel the same way about Black podcasts. And so I started noticing that whenever people talked about like the podcast renaissance, they started it with Serial. And I was just like, there's a lot of other shows that y'all could be starting with that's not Serial. And granted, I understand why, because
Yeah.
Serial was a game changer, but it was not the only one. And so what tends to happen with technology is when people tell the story of how different technologies develop, it's usually like from the perspective of someone white came in and introduced everyone to this platform. And that's not true, but those narratives continue over and over again. Like, it doesn't matter what platform it is, that tends to happen. A white person is the one that like was the architect of all of it, and then the other little people get a footnote or get like a very small sentence or two in the larger story. And I saw that happening with Combat Jack, but not just with him, but with a lot of other people who are doing amazing work, like Rod and Karen. Like, it's so many different people who do not get their flowers. And so I was like, okay, I am a researcher. I have a platform. I can help to contribute to that conversation. And so it is very important to me that we honor the waymakers who like set the stage and who saw early on that this was a platform that was going to be very important in Black storytelling. Because, I mean, one of the hallmarks of Black storytelling is we're an oral culture. Oral storytelling is a part of our DNA. Like, we're going to tell a story, and we're going to tell it in a funny way, we can tell it in a serious way, but either way, storytelling is a part of our DNA. And like, a lot of the important stories that are part of Black culture, because it's oral, have been lost, because if you don't continue to pass it down through generations, it's going to be lost because it's not written. And so I just wanted to contribute to that in my own way, because it's like, these are important, and podcasts specifically, preserving them, that's something that's important to me, because like, at the end of the day, they are digital files. And so if someone removes their feed from, the podcast apps, and where are you going to listen to the episodes? So I'm still figuring out, like, what does that mean? I don't know if that means like downloading all the transcripts. I don't know. In a perfect world, the Library of Congress would be a part of this and helping to preserve episodes. But even with that, like, I would hope that they would consult with someone like me, someone like you, because like, you can imagine the kinds of podcasts that they would consider to be important enough to be preserved at the Library of Congress. And it's probably wouldn't be any of the ones that I would be like, no, this has to be in there because this is an important episode, or this is an important moment. They more than likely would be like, nope, we'll just stick to Serial, or we'll throw in Code Switch to make that happen.
Yeah.
And that's that. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd be happy to. I'm having conversations about this now. And it is so important that we are archiving. We're already doing that part just by simply laying it down, recording it, publishing it. But what?
Yeah.
Then what? And as you mentioned, once it's gone and people stop talking about it, it can be as if it never happened.
Yeah.
And
yeah. That's the scary part.
That's
the
it.
scary part, because there's so many rich conversations that are happening. And you're right. If people stop talking about it, then it's going to go away. And so one of the things that I think is the beauty of Black podcasts specifically is that we are responding to cultural moments, and we're responding to them with very specific lenses that we're looking at. And so that also is an archive in itself, because you can go back to July 2013 when the Trayvon Martin verdict was read. And I remember that moment and that feeling of defeat when it's like, not guilty. And then it was like, whenever the next not guilty thing came out, I ran to my podcast because they helped me to make sense of what happened. And so they basically serve as like a temperature reader, essentially, of like how Black people and Black people from different communities were responding to these events. And a lot of times it's very different from how it's being portray on mainstream media, because mainstream media, they have lots of different things that are contributing to the messages that they are giving, or their perspectives or whatever. Like the amount of Black news anchors is like significantly low. Like when Joy Reid lost her show, she was like one of very few Black women national news anchors. And so when you lose those voices, you lose that perspective. And so now she has her own show. She's doing fantastic. But even with that though, like, okay, so what happens with like the amazing news that she's doing? Like, how is she preserving that? I have no idea. And so I think that those are definitely questions that we need to think about, especially now that I feel like people are being more hesitant about being like visibly open online with everything happening with the administration and like just being surveilled. The internet, I think, feels less safe than it did even a couple years ago. And so for that purpose alone, we need to figure out how to preserve these things, because I wouldn't put it past that to be something that could be next on the chopping block of things that they want to get rid of, or, you know, whatever else.
Yeah, my mind is going right now that this is one of the last spaces where freedom of speech is happening. Even this year, I used to take out like the N word and stuff like that when people would say it on the show. And this year, I'm just like, you know what? This is the last place where people can say whatever the hell they want to say,
Yeah.
and still publish it, and it airs. No one takes it down. No one says no. So whatever gets said, within reason, of course, because it's still my show. So it's like, just allow it to rock, because this is really one of the few spaces. And you mentioned Joy Reid and Don Lemon and all of them who have now moved into podcasting. They were in these places where they had to, even if they were some of the bravest amongst us, they still were getting paid. And that means that a story could still get chopped. Like, no, we're not doing that. They still were underneath that. And so I really do appreciate this opportunity that we have here and now to simply say whatever it is that we want to say, express whatever we want to express. Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. And preservation of what we're doing is very important. And I'd be happy to put my brain with you on that for sure. Your work also intersects with Black feminism and digital media. Where do you see Black women and femme creators pushing the medium in ways that aren't fully recognized?
Ooh, where to start? I see the same thing happening that happens in lots of other mediums, that like if we're talking about Blackness, a lot of times Black men get prioritized. So even like with the whole podcast bro thing, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, people saying take the mics away from them. I think that that is fascinating, because one, people ask me all the time, and I know you asked about Black women, and I'm going to get back to that, but people ask me all the time, like, are you going to cover, you know, the manosphere? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to. One, because I don't want to, but also I don't feel safe to do that. Digital misogynoir is real, and digital harm is real. And so I have no desire to. Another Black man can do that. That's not my lane. But I think that Black women are using podcasts in a variety of different ways, but also, again, to like assert themselves and to say, we are here and here are the experiences that we are having. So if Black men are feeling like their experiences are not being represented correctly or represented well in mainstream media, Black women, really, like, our voices are not being heard. And we have all of these different intersectional identities that impact the way that we show up and how we experience the world. That's not always seen. And so I think that we use podcasts in a variety of ways and a variety of topics. One of the podcasts that I'm thinking of specifically, and one of the ones I cover in my book, is Louder Than a Riot, which is the NPR podcast that got canceled. And the host actually, and I was totally fangirling, that actually got them to Zoom into our class. And so that was an absolutely fantastic episode that we had with the students. I was not expecting them to come to our class at all. And they came, and they didn't hold anything back. Like, they were very open and honest about like the anger that they felt over their podcast being canceled. But in the second season of the show, the whole theme of the season was on misogynoir. And so misogynoir, for those who aren't familiar with it, is hatred of Black women, specifically for being Black women. And so they opened up the season covering Megan Thee Stallion's trial against Tory Lanez. And so they like went to the trial and they interviewed people who were there, and they kind of like really contextualized like that particular moment and the different responses that people were having to Meg, because I mean, essentially it is a Me Too moment, but Me Too looks very different for Black women. And so I think that Meg's case really illuminated that, but lots of other high profile cases too did. But the way that Me Too is discussed within mainstream media, Black women get left out. So it was a hard episode to listen to, but it was a necessary one. And each episode of that season focused on a different aspect of misogynoir and hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
And then NPR canceled it. And I was blown that they canceled it, but it's just another way of showing how, like, you all don't even know the gem that you had on your roster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where else are people talking about misogynoir and hip hop to this level on a national platform? Like, Black feminists have been sounding the call forever, but we don't always get the same mainstream attention. This is not like an independent podcast. This is an NPR backed podcast. The first season was about mass incarceration in hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
Mass incarceration in hip hop, like, people have talked about that on mainstream media all the time, but the way that they were talking about it is completely different than how I had seen anyone else talking about it. And because of the research that they did, it actually allowed for one of the people who had a life sentence, who was a rapper with No Limit. He got exonerated and was able to come home because of their reporting. And so these are not small actions, these are big. Mainstream media was not reporting on him. I had never heard of him, and I had never seen anybody else talking about him, but they were like, we didn't forget about him. This is an important story and we're going to cover it. And then in the next season, now we're looking at, here are the ways that hip hop celebrates Black women, but also can be very damaging to Black women and in various different ways. And so to open that up with Meg was like a very powerful statement of like, we see how other people are discussing this trial. We are not doing that. And we're going to peel back the layers to show you even more how this is a pattern that happens over and over and over again. And then that sets the stage for the rest of the episodes to again show these same patterns of how Black women are being treated over and over again. And then NPR canceled it. So.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought back up the patterns, because it was a thought that I had from a previous question and answer where we talk about the different perspectives of Black folks and the unique perspective of Black folks to this space and to any space that's expressive is that we are hyper aware of most things in society because we have to be.
Yeah.
Yep. Our awareness, our observation, our pattern recognition is second to none because we have to be. Yep. I wanted to really make that point because I lost it earlier because of my brain, but it's a unique value proposition that we bring to any creative expression that details experiences in society.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that that is a really important point because even down to accents and hearing someone who sounds like you. So a part of the reason why I started listening to podcasts is I used to live in Texas and I went to grad school in Austin, which is a very white city. They at one point were highlighted as like the fastest growing city that had the most Black people leaving. So that's for another day, but it was a very isolating experience. And I was on a campus that had 4% Black students, graduate and undergraduate. And they were very proud of that number, which was mind blowing to me because I am from Chicago. I've gone to Black schools all my life, went to a HBCU for undergrad. So it was a complete culture shock. And so I also had a really long commute. And so I used to drive home and like talk to my friends. But then after a while, I was like, I got to do something else because I feel like I'm just complaining every time I talk to my friends. And my husband listened to podcasts, but he listens to sports podcasts. So I was like, this is interesting to me. And I'm not a sports person at all. So I assumed that podcasts were like sports or NPR. Mm-hmm. And neither one of those groups I belong to. So I was like, this is not for me. And then one day I remembered my friend talking to me about the read. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me just try it out, see. And I listened to it, fell in love, and I was just like, I've never heard anything like this before. But at the same time, this sounds like it could be me and my cousins or me and my friends or like a conversation I could have at my HBCU. Like, it was very familiar in a way that I had not heard in a long time. And I didn't realize how much I missed simple things like hearing Black people talk. Mm-hmm. It just hit something in me. And from there, I just went on like a rabbit hole and then I discovered other podcasts. I'm like, wait a second. There are other podcasts where people sound like me. And then there are other podcasts where people are talking about all kinds of different things. And it just blew my mind that like this existed. I just couldn't believe it. And so I think that hearing people who sounds like you, that is not a small thing. That is a big thing. And so even now I'm back to being in a Black area. Even still, hearing Black people who sounds like me, it never fails to just feel like home, feel familiar. And until you have not had that experience, you don't understand the visceral reaction that you feel. It feels like homecoming.
Yeah.
And so I think that that is also something that I want to explore in my book as well, because I think that someone who is not a part of our culture wouldn't be able to really understand what it means. Or even I was interviewing another Black woman podcaster, and they were telling me that when they edit, they and I was thinking about this when you were saying that you edited out the N-word. So you know how like Black girls will sometimes like click our tongues
Mm-hmm,
when we
mm-hmm,
are
mm-hmm.
saying something? So they were like, yeah, I don't edit that out.
Yeah.
They were like, I keep that in, I don't edit that out. Or like if we're saying like girl, like I don't edit that part out if there are silences, because the hosts are like, I want y'all to sit with what we're saying. Like the very like different things that Black people do that I wouldn't have to explain it to you.
Yeah.
If I gave you a certain look, you would be like, all right, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I get it. And so like those instances and like those specific things that Black podcasters do to kind of like throw Easter eggs to their Black audience members, or to just like say like, this is for us and I'm not explaining it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. Like those particular instances, I think are also what make these podcasts Black. That's what brings out the Blackness in them. And that's not to say that just because you're Black, you're going to understand it. Because there are going to be certain things that I am Black and I'm not going to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, because there are people who do. And that's for them. It's not for me. And so that's okay too. But I think that like the sound aspect of it, but honestly, even the visual aspect of it too. Like I'm looking at your background, like you have like somebody behind you with the afro and the headphones. Like that is obviously like a very Black image behind you, you know. And so it's like those kinds of things, I think they seem small, but they're not. They're actually very big and they're very important.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. And you would think that more Black folks would gravitate to video more because of the fact that what we do here kind of translates a lot better than in audio. If we look at each other, we say something a certain way, or do whatever. That's kind of a universal language between us. And it was something that I was concerned about when it was really audio focused, because I'm like, the audience isn't going to know that you all just made a face to one another. But it is evolving. Right. And I love that you said that, because it just had to be something that we got more familiar with, and it had to happen more and more and say, okay, I know what's happening here. I know them two women are in there having a moment, and I'll just sit here and wait because I can't see them. But I get it now. Whereas in the beginning, there was really these kind of like models of what a podcast needed to be. And so folks were kind of compromising and altering themselves in order to fit inside of that model. And now that thing is starting to break. And I'm really happy about that, because this is where we find each other. And why Black podcasts are becoming one of the more successful demographics in podcasting, because we are finding the space to be our most authentic self. And there's no one saying, turn your mic off, you can't do that no more. And why our listenership is one of the fastest growing demographics. And you wouldn't know that if you look at the industry as it puts it out there. But we are the fastest growing in both creativity and in listenership. And it's important to know why. It really is our ability to find ourselves in this. So I just have two more questions for you. And I know we're over time. So if you need to go.
No, this is great. No, this is
right.
Great. I also have a question for you. Why did you edit out the N-word? And then like, how did you get to the point to where you felt comfortable with not editing it out?
I was born in 1975. The repression, oppression, and suppression happened a lot through school and in the household. I was raised by grandparents. So it was all of those things I had to work through. And that's, again, my own stuff. We are bringing our own stuff to this. So this year, as we are seeing the suppression and the surveillance and all of that about speech and what we can and can't say, I was like, oh, that's over. That's clipped. I'm not doing that anymore. Because whatever it was in my mind, in my body that said, oh, I can't. And then I was like, I can do whatever the hell I want to do.
This is fascinating. I appreciate this answer because I make them do transcripts. And so because AI transcripts put it in. And the first time I saw it, I didn't know what to expect because I thought it was going to remove it. It did not. And it put the ER at the end. And I was like, okay. So as I was doing my own transcript, I was like, okay, I need to bring this up, especially because I know the demographics of my class. So I brought it up, like, look, when you hear some of these episodes, because I assign all kind of episodes, there's no filter. So my y'all college students, there's no filter. So you might hear people saying words that if you are not a part of that group, you should not be saying it. And so if you are discussing the episode, you can discuss it in a way where you don't say the words that are offensive or whatever, because that is where I'm putting my foot down. Like, you cannot give me a explanation as to why you said it. And it's not because, oh, well, they said it. Nope. We're going to put that rule out right now. And the students understood it, and I haven't had any issues with it, but it's something that I'm like cognizant of, that because I am having them listen to these episodes, and then sometimes they get to pick their own episodes to listen to. I just want to make sure that, like, we're on the same page, that, like, you don't think that your Black professor told you it was okay for you to say that, because we're going to have a big problem if I ever hear any of y'all ever doing it. But it is like those kinds of conversations we do have to have, because there are people who be like, oh yeah, well, so-and-so said I could say it. So
yeah, hell
like,
no.
nah.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah. No, and it's true. And then here's the other piece that's happening and has been happening for, I would say, the last 2 years. There's a thing now called brand safety. And I liken it to what used to be outside of restaurants and beer gardens and clubs back in the day. No construction boots, no fitted hats, all this. And I'm like, this is just another way to say you can't come in. So again, as a people, we are constantly aware of what's occurring around us. What is the opportunity to say, no, we can't give you this funding, we can't do this because of that. And it's only that space of liberation that we get in that relationship with it that says, whether you do or you don't, I still get to, I still can, I still have the freedom to do whatever I want to do. But that's a relationship and a process. We're not socialized to be free at all. And so just to land the plane there, all of those things are part of what makes us up until it doesn't anymore. And so I love to see when it doesn't. And that is also the evolution of the expression. People will notice that they didn't hear it before, and then they'll notice that they hear it now. And that's a difference, right? And then you see, again, even with us as creators, as people who are expressing our own evolution as we get more and more confident and comfortable behind the mic. And that's something for all of us, no matter who I am in the space, no matter who you are and your knowledge of the space, we're all still people becoming.
Yeah. I like that. I appreciate that. I would love to talk to you more about that, because the editing choices that people have are just absolutely fascinating to me. Like, how do you decide what gets cut and what doesn't, or what requires more explanation? Because you're like, are they going to get this? Code Switch has an episode where they talk about the explanatory comma, which is like, if you were to say, I don't know, Bad Bunny, Puerto Rican, I don't even know what genre of music he would be considered. I know he's not pop, but let's just say pop. So it's like you're providing further context. And so during the episode, they talk about, like, okay, well, how do you determine, like, what needs explanation and what doesn't need explanation? And then people who are listening to the show who are like, well, why are you explaining who Bad Bunny is? Or I was listening to an episode and they were explaining who Biggie was. And I'm like, why are you explaining who Biggie is? Like, I don't understand. Why is that something that needs explanation? So it's just interesting to me, the choices that people make when they are composing the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what translates, again, if you say Bad Bunny's reggaeton, okay, what is that? But I know what pop is. I know what pop is. That's easy. I don't have to go any deeper than just this episode. And that's another problem. Critical thought, critical analysis. Don't take my word for it. Learn it for yourself. All of that just kind of allows space for people not to have to do that. So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to answer it. You've said community builders need to pay attention to what communities need and connect them to resources creatively. In podcasting, what does that look like in practice?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I always tell my students that I think that show notes are a really, really important space and you can do a lot of interesting things with. So if there's something that is talked about during the episode that you didn't get a chance to expand upon, or if it's, let's say, like recently here in the DMV, we had a big snowstorm and there were some people who went without power, without water, without food. So let's say there's an episode kind of talking about what the snowstorm meant to different communities, like whatever. And so let's say in the show notes, if you are someone who lost power, lost food, and you're trying to find local resources to connect to access those kinds of things, I'm going to link to more information about that in the show notes. Or if I mention a story or a case and I don't provide a full explanation of it, here's a link to a longer story about it that you can read at your own time so you can find out more information. Because one of the things that happens too is that telling someone go find the information out on your own is not always the best thing, especially if it's something that is more obscure and there's not a lot of information about it, or the information that is out there about it is more misinformation than like accurate information. You can use the show notes to provide a corrective to that or just to provide more information. But also bringing in different guests or perspectives that you might not necessarily see. So, I mean, even within podcasting, sometimes there can be kind of like a hierarchy of the people who make the podcast rounds and like you see them on podcasts all the time. That's fine. That's great. But then there are some voices that are still marginalized within podcasts. So maybe as a creator, it's okay, I'm going to tell this story in a different way. And I'm going to highlight a voice that you probably haven't heard. So maybe from this perspective, we talk to the person who you think we're supposed to talk to. Like that's the person that you see all the time. But we haven't heard from the perspective of someone who we just don't normally hear from. We're going to give them a platform and we're going to give them a chance to speak and to share their story, because I do believe that storytelling and story sharing is powerful. But if you don't have the platform or if no one hears your story, then that power is taken away. So I think that you can use podcasts in really interesting ways. You can also take your mic outside of your space and go record at an event. I love episodes like that where people are like, I'm going to go to a concert or I'm going to go to a community fair or whatever, and I'm just going to take my mic and I'm going to talk to people there. And that's the episode. I think that that also is a powerful way of connecting people and using the episode as a space to bring in multiple perspectives that people might not hear about, or just so that people can be a part of the experience, even if they weren't there to like physically experience it.
For sure. I'm very curious about the book and when we're going to be able to get our hands on it.
So I'm currently writing it, and writing a book is a whole entire process that has just completely shifted things for me, just in terms of like the way that I work and even having the confidence to write a book and to like consider myself an expert. That is also new. So I'm sitting in what that means for me and like what it means for me to be known as an expert on Black podcasts. But academic publishing also is pretty slow. So I anticipate this book might not be out until like 2028.
Okay.
Hopefully sooner. But once I submit the manuscript, I have no say so in like when it comes out. But I will make sure to update you once it does come out, because I do have lots of ideas. Some academic books, because they're different from like trade books, they don't necessarily have like book tours. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I definitely want to make sure that this book is as accessible as possible. And so I do want to have events connecting people just to talk to each other about the book, the people who I feature in the book. So I have lots of different ideas because it's an academic book, but I am very much writing it from the perspective of like a general audience.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. If someone leaves your class or listens to Black Pod class and starts creating differently because of it, what's the shift you hope has happened in how they see their work?
Ooh, that is a really good question. I just hope that they feel proud of their work. I hope they take ownership of it. If it's a show where they're bringing on guests, I hope that they consider a variety of guests and don't just interview people who they're comfortable with, step out of their comfort zone and bring in different voices. And I just hope that they consider the topic, because just because you have a platform, it doesn't mean that you're using it responsibly. And so if nothing else, I hope that they are being responsible, because even like with the Manosphere podcast, which I have lots of feelings about, I also understand why they are appealing to young Black men, especially because it's like, if you feel disenfranchised, if you feel like you don't have a space, if you feel like you don't have a platform to voice your opinion, or you feel like no one's listening to you, a podcast makes sense. Like you have a mic in front of you and you have people who will listen to you and who will comment. So it makes sense to me, but they're not always using it responsibly. And so I definitely hope that they are using it responsibly, especially if they're saying like, I got inspired from listening. I hope you're using it responsibly, because
Hmm.
do not attach me or the Black Podcast brand to anything that is not being done responsibly. And when I say responsibly, I don't mean like it has to be like politically correct, none of that. But I just want it to be thoughtful in the execution. Like,
Hmm.
I am not trying to have someone come out of my class and do like a racist, sexist, because that goes against the values of the class.
Hmm.
If you want to do that, then you're doing that on your own time. That's not something that you would ever see in my classroom space.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate that. And Black Pod Class, which is the podcast, or
Yes.
is it 4 seasons because it's been 4 classes?
That's a good question. It should be. I'm still learning.
Hmm.
And so, like, with each iteration of the class, I'm learning. So, I think right now it might be listed as 2 seasons, but there's 38 episodes currently right now.
Nice.
So, it's not necessarily divided up by seasons. And I actually still have more episodes to upload, but I am one person. And this is a labor of love because, like, I don't get paid extra to do it. Like,
Hmm.
as popular as the class is, I don't get like extra money for it or anything like that. So it's definitely a labor of love. It's a lot. And so if there are other professors who are interested in doing this, because I get asked that a lot by other professors who are like, how do I do this and replicate this in my own class? Just know that it's not just like hand your students a mic and upload whatever they finish. It's not that simple at all. So yeah, there's 38 episodes. I need to upload more, but it definitely is an amazing thing I'm very proud of. And in terms of tenure, because I get asked this question too, my department is still trying to figure out what to do with me in terms of like how to evaluate me, because a podcast is not a book. And so they're like, we don't know what to do because you don't fit into this academic box,
Hmm.
which I'm like, y'all already knew that when y'all hired me, but okay. But they're trying to figure out like what this is look like for my tenure case. And so initially when I was talking about the podcast, I would talk about it as if it was like one episode. But I had to really sit back and think about like, no, that's erasing the work that I'm doing. Like, there's 38 episodes. Each of these episodes is its own thing. And so I actually listed out all 38 episodes on my CD. And when I listed them out, I was like, oh, now I'm really seeing like the amount of labor that I'm putting in. And so that would be my advice to anyone if you want to replicate it, if you are an academic and concerned about how to present it to your peers. Make sure that you present it the same way that you would an academic article or a book chapter or whatever, because you're putting in the same amount, honestly, if not more work.
Hmm.
So represent it instead of just like, oh, I just did this little thing. And like, no, this was a lot of work and it's important and it should be treated that way.
Hmm. Hmm. It goes back to the process of becoming, like understanding how important you are. And I want to take that moment to really acknowledge that for you, because you are disrupting academia when it comes to this work,
Yeah.
and trailblazing this, because the next generation of professors, or it doesn't have to be that long of a gap, but someone else who comes in, it's almost like when a legal case has been won or lost, and then that becomes the reference point for this is what
Right.
happened. So
Right.
acknowledging, giving your flowers right now and trailblazing the work in university, that's amazing. It's amazing. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
that work. Absolutely. So let
Thank
folks
you.
know how they can connect with you and anything else that you want people to know.
Yeah, thank you for that. So obviously I would love for you all to listen to the Black Podcast, and you can find it. It's pretty much on every podcast platform, and it's Black Pod Class. So it's a little play on podcasts. And we do have social media, but it has not been updated. So there's that. The other thing is I'm actually producing another podcast that is separate from the Black Podcast, and it's actually going to be a supplement to a online textbook about poetry and activism. And again, if you're a professor, you're interested in like translating your work in a public way, you can do podcasts as like a public scholarship outlet and include it in your CV. And so this podcast is going to be sponsored by the University of Delaware Press. And so it is going to be an academic press published podcast. So I'm really excited about it. So when it comes out, I'll make sure to share that as well. But I got to interview some absolutely amazing people, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited about what it means for my academic work too, because it's going to be another thing that my department is going to have to figure out what to do with, because it's not a book, but the amount of work that I put into it it's pretty much the same amount of work that I'm doing for the book that I'm writing. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're going to have to expand the way that they think about how they are measuring what a successful academic looks like. Because yes, I can write you a book, but I also would much rather do public facing work, because one, I can do it much faster. It's also more accessible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's important to me to have a balance of both of those things. So I'm excited for that podcast to come out.
I'm excited too. I'm excited for all the work that you're doing. Any way that I can jump in and do anything with you, I'm
Yes,
here for it. And I
yes,
appreciate
yes.
you. I really do. Thank you so much for this conversation.
This was fantastic. Thank you. And also, I want to give you your flowers, because you're also a pioneer in the field that needs to be recognized. And I appreciate the work and your also insistence that Black podcasts need a space and need like an official space to be recognized and celebrated. So thank you